Hello. This is the first night of the 5th week of Bell Hooks' 3 years scholar in residency at Eugene Lane College. And on behalf of the new school, I am deeply honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation, In Your Face, Public Art, Private Vision, with Laurie Anderson, Theaster Gates, and Bell Hooks. My name is Karen Cooney. I'm the director of the Vera List Center for Art and Politics here at the new school. And when I asked myself this morning what I would really want to say and express tonight before I would clear the stage as quickly as possible, it was the recognition of how conversations such as the one we're about to enjoy are so extraordinarily rare. Rare because exquisitely crafted encounters simply don't happen very often. And rarer still since this one is taking place in the presence of all of you and many, many other people beyond these spaces because the event is live streamed. It is also rare since although our thinking and teaching at the new school has been shaped by their work and sometimes by their presences, never have the three come together in one public event. In short, it doesn't happen very often that Laurie Anderson, Theaster Gates, and Bell Hooks hang out together, or maybe they actually do, but I'm very grateful that we are able to join them here tonight. Increasingly, as political life is getting more co-opted, irrelevant, even a matter of rhetoric, as democracy is being replaced by post-democracy, decide to look for new models and prototypes of being together, being community for a time, being neighbors, being together is the arts, the work of filmmakers, of musicians, visual artists, writers, and potters, not by itself, but in continuous exchange with one another. And so, yes, this is a rare opportunity, but it also makes a hell a lot of sense that mapping desire, archaeologies of change, the topic of this week's programs, will be examined with precision and urgency tonight by our three speakers. I think it's also not a surprise that all of them have already interacted and spoken at New School events over many, many years. Theaster Gates is a Chicago-based installation artist and the recipient of the inaugural Vera List Center Prize for Art and Politics in 2013, where he was honored with a conference and exhibition and a faculty research trip. Iconic performance artist, composer, and musician Laurie Anderson was the 2005 Dorothy Hirshhorn Film Festival Artist in Residence, also here at the New School. And then, of course, Bell Hooks. We know she is a scholar in residence here at the New School, an author, activist, and feminist. Recognized internationally as a scholar, poet, author, radical thinker. She has dozens of books to her name covering topics of gender, race, class, spirituality, teaching, and the significance of media and contemporary culture. Hooks has been celebrated as one of our nation's leading public intellectuals by the Atlantic Monthly and listed as one of Utner Reader's 100 visionaries who could change your life. I am delighted to welcome you here and them on the stage and hand it over to Dr. Hooks.
I'd like to begin by encouraging anybody who's in the back that wants to sit on the floor up front to feel free to do so. I want to begin by talking about the fact that I don't see myself as a public intellectual, and I don't talk about myself as a public intellectual, but I'm interested in the fact that other people are framing me all the time. And I could spend a lot of time trying to establish how I see myself, as opposed to how I am seen or categorized by other people. And I think that for me, it's been interesting to feel like that's not my task. that actually takes me away from my task, which is the work. This year, I'm one of those people who likes themes for my life. Well, the year 2015 for me is one of working with the work, because I've been trying to establish this Bell Hooks Institute, and it has taken me away from writing in the way that I normally do. I want to say that I'm here with these two individuals precisely because the work they do and are doing requires courage. And one of the reasons that I thought about the notion of public art, private vision, is that anytime you mesh activism or politics and art, you risk that people frame you as not thinking, as simply being, as simply acting, as though you don't, but Theaster doesn't spend hours in contemplation, study, and reading as he prepares for a new project. And so, in part, both of these people have been an inspiration to me in terms of that courage to do one's work when it's really not that validated all the time by worlds outside yourself. That to begin with that private vision, that you recognize that people may or may not understand. Theaster really gets it because, unlike me and Laurie, he deals with big money and the man has a bank. I mean, really? Laurie and I do not have a bank. And of course, that's one of his amazing projects. That
I have a broke bank.
A broke bank.
Broken bank.
But what's interesting is how you're filling that bank with riches that move us away from money as the sign of that which it brings us wealth. So why don't we start with, Laurie has to leave sooner rather than later in some ways, so we're going to really let her have a lot of the space. So, Laurie, this last project, tell people about this last night's project that ended.
I don't know when it's going to end, but it's taken me many years to actually do this. But this particular version of this is called habeas corpus, which of course means to have the body. It's a court order that tells the jail to bring the prisoner out for trial. My collaborator in this project was Mohammed Al-Ghorani. He's the youngest detainee at Guantanamo. And I've been working with him for many months. He lives in West Africa now. What the project was, these detainees are not allowed to come to the United States. And I just started, I'm interested in stories and how people still tell stories, and his story versus the government story versus our own big story about where we're going and what's happening in the world, and how and your own personal story as well. So the story that Muhammad got stuck with was that he was an Al-Qaeda operative in London. Trouble was that with that story was that he was only 11 at the time, and he was a goat herder in Saudi Arabia. However, he was a young boy in Saudi, and his uncle had a computer school in Pakistan, and so Muhammad wanted to learn computers, so he went there. And it happened to be the bad luck of 9/11 happened right then, and he was captured by the Northern Alliance and taken to Bagram, where he was tortured. He was then sold to us for that $5,000, as 98% of the Guantanamo people were. And when he was 14, and then he was in Guantanamo until he was 21. So he spent all of that time there. We did very, very, very bad things to this boy. We tortured him. We broke his back. We broke his head. We cut him everywhere. this is not a great story, and a lot of Americans aren't really quite aware of what's going on down there. We know it's something bad, but it's all the bad people. Okay, so what is that story, and where is it coming from? How did we start believing it? Stories are, you make the world from words, as Bell knows. You create the world out of words. So the world they created, first of all, when they got these guys, when we bought them, we declared them non-persons. That's the first thing we did. We said, you're non-persons. Who gave us the right to say non-persons? Well, we just took the right to say, you're non-persons. So you don't have the rights of the Geneva Conventions. We can do whatever we want with you. I was just telling Theaster and Bell before this, this has really been an amazing project for me, because I've watched how you can, Bell spoke of framing and other people telling your story. Here's a guy who got a story plastered on him, and he's going, whoa, no, not exactly. But he's a prisoner. He's thrown in a dog pen, right away. And then he is not given a right to a lawyer, as none of the people are. So we suspended habeas corpus, our central to our own constitution. We just said, they're not people, so we don't have to do anything for them. We can do whatever we want. I was just also telling them about a magazine that was fact-checking some of these things about this installation, which was at the Park Avenue Armory for the last 3 days. Because I said, well, can I say, in this story, they're fact-checking that doctors were at all of his torture sessions, because this is an important thing to say. And they said, no, you can't actually say that. What you have to say is, here's what the government wants you to say. Members of the behavioral science consultancy team were present at the detainees' sessions. Okay? Mohammed is unable to really see doctors because he doesn't trust doctors, because American doctors were at all his torture sessions. American psychologists were at all his torture sessions. Making sure that they just push him to the edge and come back. There were many suicides at Guantanamo, and Mohammed was attempted that several times. But guess what? Suddenly, all the suicides disappeared. Coincidentally, when the suicides were suddenly labeled manipulative, self-injurious behavior. Now, many people died of manipulative, self-injurious behavior. Fatal. But no suicides. Bingo! So, as you watch people tell their stories. So I met Mohammed through a series of many sort of... the Park Avenue Armory asked me to do a project, and I had wanted to do one with American prisoners. I had done something a very long time ago with a prisoner, and a kind of real-time thing. About 15 years ago, we built a studio in a prison in Austria. I'll tell you a little tiny bit of background. I was asked to do a sound installation in a 13th century church, really reverberant, didn't work. So I was freaking out. I went up to the bell tower. I was don't have an idea. I've been here days. I don't know what to do. I'm an artist working with whatever stories, multimedia. So I look down, and in the middle of this perfect little Austrian town is a maximum security prison. And over there is a guard in a guard tower with a machine gun. So I'm in the bell tower. He's in the guard tower. I'm going, whoa, ding, dong, dong. Came down and I said to the curators, we're going to build a studio in the prison, and we're going to have one of the prisoners sit very still for 3 months and make a life-size cast of his body and put it in the church. And we're going to beam his image live onto the life-size cast of his body. And it's going to be about the function of telepresence in our culture. There or not there, the attitude towards the body of the church and the prison. Incarnation, incarceration. So, surprisingly, they said, okay. I was like, stop me now. I was like... So, and then, what did they discover? They discovered a law from the Austro-Hungarian Empire that had trickled down, and it meant that when you're in prison, you don't own your own image. Bell also was talking about ownership of your what people say, who they say you are, or what your image is. So anyway, the Austro-Hungarian Empire had it really down, who owns what, and so you don't own your own image, so you can't use it in prison. Okay, so I thought, good, off the hook, because at that point it was seeming like a great idea to put a prisoner, a killer, in the apse of a church in a very conservative country like Austria. You know, just wasn't sounding too smart. So, but however, at that point, their attorney general said, I love your project. You have a special dispensation, note the like church, you know, terminology, you know, to do this project. So, anyway, I eventually didn't do it. The Whitney then next asked me to do something with them, and I said, let's do a collaboration between Sing Sing and the Whitney, two guarded institutions. What do you keep in your what do you keep in that building? Prisoners are that needs so much guarding. So we were going to do that, and it didn't work because technological sort of things. But and then I was describing this project to a guy named Germano Chalant, kind of freelance curator here in New York, and he said, I found the prison and the cultural institution. So we did this project at the Prada Foundation in Milan. One of the most overproduced projects I've ever done. We dug cable all the way through Milan. We worked with San Vittorio Prison. Now, of course, here's the catch here is I'm an artist. I'm working with this person who's going to sit still for 3 months. This is 1999. And the exploitative potential for this is huge. You know, and I'm going to sign my name. You're buying artwork because you're, you know. So it was very important to me to find a collaborator. So I went to the prison and worked with all these guys from San Vittorio. Now, these are guys who are white-collar prisoners. They are in because they basically dismantled the Italian economy single-handedly. They're very smart lawyers. They speak Greek and Latin. They are allowed to use steak knives. They have kitchens there. They can have their wine collection. They're making, they're writing their books and their articles. They're all wearing Armani. Everything's cool except you don't look down at their shoes, and something's wrong with their shoes. Their shoes are slippers because they are going nowhere ever. So I'm talking to these guys, and because they're lawyers and because they're able to manipulate your gaze and your everything, they're like really amazing talkers, you know. So I'm like gradually getting kind of hypnotized by these guys, and then I'm talking to Santino. Santino is one of the prisoners. He's over in the corner. He's a bank robber. And he'd killed a few people on the way out of the bank. That's protecting his recently acquired property. And so talking to Santino, and I said, Santino, if we collaborate on this, if we do this together, how do you see this project? And he said, I see this as a virtual escape. And I said, you're my man. So we did this together, and he sat still for 3 months, and his image was beamed all the way into the Prada Foundation. And when I saw him there, it was not like a prisoner. He looked like a judge. He had this, incredible presence of the body just being, and so I thought someday I'm going to do this in America because we have the biggest prison population in the world. New York State is way up there. I mean, the prisons are up there with insurance in terms of income. So I proposed at the Park Avenue Armory, when they asked me to do something there last year, to do something with prisoners, streaming in 12 prisoners. They'd be sitting there, 2 rows of 6, facing each other like picture Egyptian statues, Hatshepsut in an Egyptian tomb. They're looking at each other. They're live prisoners being streamed in from prisons all over New York, and they're sitting there, witnesses. They're sort of like time and witnessing. We worked on this for several months, and then Homeland Security let us know that you will never do this project in the United States of America, ever. And I didn't see the upside to that thing. So I was like, dropped it. Then, through the ACLU, I met this group in London called Reprieve, and they're based in the UK. They're an international group that works with people who are facing capital punishment in the US and Guantanamo detainees. So I'm calling this lawyer in London going, I want to make a kind of a statue, and it's going to be beamed from there to there, and it's going to be like blah, 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 and I'm babbling, And so she's listening to me, and she didn't say politely, thank you so much for your interesting art project description. No, she said, tell me more. And this was Kat Craig. She was the head lawyer of the people who represent Guantanamo detainees. We do that a little bit, but we have a lot of restrictions in there on helping these people. So these London people became my partners in this project, and and she said, I have somebody, and his name is Mohammed, and we'll see if he wants to do this with you. He has become one of my best friends. I went to West Africa to meet with him, where he lives now, and he told me these stories, and the stories went on and on. They're not just about what happened to him in Guantanamo, but his life and what he, and what it was like to be so hated, to feel the hatred of so many people directed at him. Now, he was 1,000% innocent, as are pretty much 98% of the people in Guantanamo, just for your information, have all been cleared. We got the prisoners we were looking for. Talk about profiling. This is the ultimate profiling. So anyway, I'm going to stop now in a second, but just to say that what we did with this project was we built a statue the size of the Lincoln Memorial. And we beamed Mohammed onto this statue. We wrapped his image live coming from West Africa. So you come into this place, and there's this huge statue, and he's looking at you, and he's live. And what happened was so amazing, because all of these people, I was really kind of afraid, because I'd gotten a few threats with this thing. It was a little bit scary. There are people in this country that are a little bit like, terrorist, and they don't bother to look into the story of what actually happened with this person. They don't bother it, and also we were told these are bad guys. They're worthless. They're bad guys. They're really, really bad guys. So anyway, I just have spent the last few days in this place watching people come up to this camera that's mounted way, way up at 5 stories up in the ceiling, which shows Mohammed. He can look into the Park Avenue Armory at people who come to them. And we thought maybe people are going to come with their selfies and kind of me and the big statue of it. But they were talking to the camera, and they were all, we didn't have an audio feed. So what they were doing was they were looking up and they were going, it was so amazing. I mean, so when you have information, when you get real information and don't buy into the story, I just saw, I know a lot of Americans want terrorists to fry, and, terrorism is reprehensible, but, separating out people's stories is something else. Really finding out what's actually going on and not necessarily believing it. So also, this exhibition was opinion-free, I have to say. We never used any words like,
imperialist, white supremacist.
Yes, exactly. All of that language. We didn't use that language. And we just had information. And Mohammed spoke for himself, and he told incredible stories. I'll tell you just one of them. He was saying, one of the detainees had a dream, and he dreamed that there was a submarine that came to rescue all the guys in Guantanamo that night. Guantanamo Bay was filled with U.S. helicopters and ships looking for the submarine that this guy had dreamed about. This is delusional. Many of the stories that we make up about where we are and who we are and what we're doing, where we're going, they're delusional. So I got to get to know this person, and I got to make a platform for him to tell his story. That was just my job, just to here's the platform and here's how it's going to work. And then it was just so amazing to see people. I trust audiences, and I trust people to look at what things for themselves. I don't ever want to tell people what to think or do. I want to hear how you deal with political things too, because it's really itchy when you're like, I just hate it when people tell me what to think. I'm going, you don't even know me. Don't tell me what to think. Thank you very much.
But delusion has to be, we have to break the delusion. The bridge of delusion and illusion has to be destroyed in order for a real bridge to be constructed. And that's part of the intervention of your work. It's part of the types of intervention Theaster is doing in Chicago, I kept thinking about how he's operating in a different world that is perceived in many ways as a world of terror, which is the world of black poverty, aggression, etc. And, you know, things that the public don't hear about Theaster, you know, when his work is shot at, when he's threatened. So I hope that he'll enter now and talk a little bit, because for all three of us, collaborative work is really crucial. I mean, part of why I began the conversations was I don't believe in the lecture anymore. I believe that there is so much more capacity for love and mutuality in the conversation, that people talking together is where insights spring up, and so much can be restored by the imagination. So that's part of what I think Theaster has been using his imagination to bring renewal and restoration to suffering black communities. Black people in this society are in states of collective suffering and pain. And part of what Theaster has been doing with his work is, how do I create an intervention? How does art create an intervention? So tell people about the bank.
So I think the way you're talking about this is right. But if I could just be a little bit kind of theoretical about art for a second, there's the thing that we go to MFA school for, which is like a series of studio classes, critique by our peers, a faculty member who's a little bit upset that their career never took off, so they're really mean to the grad students, right? And there's this way in which the thing that we're taught in the MFA and sometimes in the MA or the MS is a kind of a professionalization around the possibility of making, which is cool. But rarely are we taught that in all of, if the words that people use are reflexivity and self-evaluation and constant critique, that thing gets limited some kind of way to like your fucked up sculptures. And it's never a way of imagining that the reflexive has something to do with something that might exist outside your studio. Like, is it possible that we could be reflexive about anything? Is it possible that we have the capacity, in fact, to transform anything? And that maybe the studio critique, the studio practice, is simply the kind of preliminary training ground by which we might transform the world. But they never give us that. It's like imagining that an athlete is only being trained to run up and down a basketball court. And that for the athletes, the football players at Iowa State when I was an undergrad, if they did anything off the field, they could lose their scholarship. So it was a way, like football was a way of keeping the strongest black cats under control. And so you have football, you have basketball, you have the prison. You know. And so like what happens when these cats are out of control, right? And it's like all I know how to do is play football till I retire. And so I'll make some money, I'll invest it in it, but it's like, what if all of that power, if a football player understood that in fact they were just being made ready for something bigger, that strength was actually meant for something other than head-on collisions with another man for no reason, right? And so I think that for me, art, there was a way in which something got in there that made me think, oh, this is not about clay. This is not about the painting. This is actually about a set of tactics that would allow me to be effective in the world. I don't know where that came from, but it definitely didn't come from a professor who was trying to teach me how to game out the art world, right? And so I think to us, before getting to the bank, to us, I'm saying that your MFA is not about painting. And that whatever you think you're learning, magnify that toward the real world. And that the painting is an important space. Like, it allows for the symbolic to happen. And sometimes the symbolic, like, we can't release your friend, your collaborator. We can't release him. But there are some things that we can do symbolically that, if done, may actually come closer to a kind of freedom, if not a real freedom. And so I think that interruption of art is exciting.
Well, I think of Laurie telling us earlier that he had always perceived people in this country as hating him. And that moment when all the people are holding up their hands, which, you know, in the black church, when we hold up our hands, it's for the Spirit to descend. And when those people are mouthing, "I'm sorry," and holding up their hands, then he sees that there is another America, there's another U.S. of A., not the U.S. of A. that has been his constant torment. And that is done, that experience is brought about by art, by the visual. I mean, in one of the Theaster books, it says the beautiful can transform life as it is lived with others. Mm-hmm. So that moment of union between one who is at risk and in prison with those who are able to move about freely becomes a way to change all the gazes in that moment.
So that maybe that's a good way to enter the bank then. So, okay. So a couple.
He was saying that's a good way to enter the bank.
Yeah. So a couple years ago, the city was going to tear down a building. I asked that the city not tear down the building. In the newspaper, they'll say the city gave me the building for $1. What that means is I inherited a city's problem and a liability. And immediately before giving me the building, I had to do about $500,000 worth of work in advance of gaining ownership and deed and title to the building. That the dollar was the city understanding that the building was in such disrepair that it would require a tremendous amount of effort and legwork to get it to the point of repair. The dollar, in my case, different from traditional developers, didn't come with the other conventional kinds of resources that a city would make available to a developer. I got the building and that was it. Where another developer might get 20% of the value of the building in new market tax credits, or 20% of the value of the building in historic tax credits, or additional TIF resources, tax increment financing. Like, the building is going to make so much money over the next 20 years, that amount of money that it might make, we'll give you that in no taxes or in the form of a grant that would be paid back through taxes. Basic plannerly stuff. There was no money in the TIF. There was no new market tax credit. And the building was too small to really benefit from the upside of a historic tax credit. So any traditional developer in the 17 who had tried before were like, this ain't a deal. Because the building doesn't offer a financial upside. And so if the principal reason for development in the United States is a financial upside, the reason that the thing hadn't been developed, because everybody acknowledged that it was a beautiful building, was because, like, when nobody gonna make no money. Either enter the dummy, Theaster Gates, right? Or enter a person with an ideology that imagines that there's something other than currency that's the upside. And so the challenge we had over the 2.5 years was, so now I got a bank. And I have 2 months to find $500,000 so that the city might approve me getting the bank. I gotta first gamble $500,000 in order to get the bank for real. So we make these bank bonds, right? So the bank bonds, we cut these bank bonds up, we sell them in Basel, we raise $500,000, we got $500,000, we remove the scaffolding, put a new roof on, boom. The bank bond was a work of art. But what made it a work of art was that Swiss bankers were bailing out a bank underwater. That was really exciting to me. So people would say, well, why don't you always use bank bonds? Well, I was like, well, I'm not a bank bond artist. But there was Basel, Switzerland, an abandoned bank, and my need for some cash. And then people started like selling the bonds right after, whatever. So it made sense. So there's a way in which, like, I was interested in the poetics of the bank all along. I wanted to have a conversation with historic preservation. I wanted preservation to be a little bit more critical. I had these collections of things that needed a home, and they needed a right home. And
Yeah,
so,
speak about those collections, because I think it's so vital.
so Linda Johnson Rice is the heir of Johnson Publishing Corporation. They made Ebony and Jet, Hue and Tan, Negro Digest, Ebony South Africa, Ebony Junior. They were publishers. And John Johnson really was an important kind of figure in the black community because he was projecting this kind of futures for the black middle class. He was attempting to kind of change how black people saw themselves in relationship to what white people said black people were. He managed the images of black folk, right? And he showed them all over the world. It was amazing. But they were moving out of their building and they were deaccessioning their library, and I kind of inherited it. It was all of the research material. It's like 28,000 books or so, plus all of the back copies of Ebony and Jet and every other magazine.
So you
they
didn't
had.
buy it? Because that's the story I
No.
heard. Okay.
It was a gift. And so the bank was supposed to be both a kind of repository for these glass lantern slides, these books, these things that had been circulating on Dorchester, on my block, but really we didn't have the permission or the right by use of the building to make them really, really public. But in a way, I needed the last 5 years to make them important and to make my neighborhood important, that then when we had this bigger building, this newer, that the things would kind of keep morphing and a kind of positive attrition would happen, and we would finally have the right space for these things. So we built the building. But I won't talk a lot about the building. What I will talk about was at the gala. So we invited all these people to the gala. At first in Chicago, the gala was $5,000 a person, and it was intended to like get all the rich people in Chicago to come and support the bank. I was like, I just put $4.5 million in to a cultural facility in the hood, and I want the families of the city to join me in supporting black culture in a black neighborhood. At first, folk were like, "Well, Theaster, this is a very expensive gala. I mean, no one spends $5,000 a head. Come on, give us a break. I mean, it's on 68th and Stony Island." And so there's this issue about value in the hood, and what limits wealthy people had around where they imagined positing their cash. So that was interesting to me. But what started to happen was that a couple of the folk in Chicago, but then a lot of outside folks started buying $50,000 tables. So then, dude, Jim Chanos buys a table. And it's like, whoa, Jim Chanos, great, that's great. And then, our country's treasurer buys a table. And then people were interested in being at the gala and spending 50 G's, not because they believed in black culture, but because they wanted to be nearer Penny or Jim or Leslie or whoever was, you know what I mean? So the repository that night was the wealth of our country that's interested in art, plus the culture of our country, David Ajay and the Chris O'Feely and Lorna and Thelma and and it was like this kind of moment when the black literati, the Jewish cultural literati, the white curious types, and some folk from the hood were kind of all in this place together in black space, 98% black. And what that did for the city was really phenomenal, because it was like all of a sudden the large white institutions that had been struggling with diversity were immediately terrified. Right? It was like, if this brother can do this without our executive administration acumen, right? If he can pull this off, and he got friends that are not our trustees that can bring in another kind of resource, and then he got all the black artists that all the Jews collect, this is gonna be a problem, right? And so there was a real, it was an immediate, let's partner. It was an immediate, like, let's partner, right? I'm just being for real, y'all. I'm just being for real about how culture works. Let's partner. And so the interruption in the platform, it was like, what if the interruption wasn't like a gentle slice, but it was like a deep cut in how we imagine culture migrating through a city? And then what if the platform created was the most innovative and highest production level? Go back to you. What if it actually, so Michelle and Degio cellos in the library, like, and then Jason Moran's up on the third floor with his, and it was like this beautiful moment.
I'm upset that I wasn't there.
I'm sorry, Ben. We're gonna have our moment, I told you. So anyway, so I think in a way, what I think I'm talking about is how can art create a disruption? The art is important. Michelle's playing, Jason's playing, the art on the walls, that's important. That's art. Then there's the disruption, like the thing that could happen as a result of a kind of art happening is another kind of art. And I think that those things together, both the maker and the disruptive function, is something that I'm very...
And I think that, again, we have to honor that on both their parts with the different projects, it takes courage to be willing to try that. I mean, and Theaster is an interesting sort of guy. I don't know why he became interested in bell hooks, but he kind of, became interested in bell hooks, and I got a call saying...
Very interested.
Theaster would like to come to Berea, where I was trying to do on a much lower scale what Theaster is doing in my hood, which is really white and pretty old, which was to set up a Bell Hooks Institute. And part of it is I had been watching so many black artists like Essex Hempel, Marlon Riggs, different people die. Pat Parker, Audre Lorde, where it was unclear where will their papers go, where will their legacies go. And so I had, those of you who know me well know I don't do much with computers, but I'm learning. I had someone who do a search to find that there was only one black woman we could find that had any kind of center by her name, and that was Shirley Chisholm here in Brooklyn. And so I thought, well, I'm so worried about my work just, being flushed down the toilet when I die. Because believe you me, I was saying the other day, students of mine don't know who Pat Parker is. They don't know who Audre Lorde is. It's very invisible. I mean, Michelle Wallace was on it when she wrote Invisibility Blues, that it is possible for this system that we live within to erase people, to disappear people, no matter how much art or how much writing that they've produced. And so I thought, okay, part of the legacy I have from Theaster is self-determination. Well, let me try. And I can't tell you how many people, black and white, told me, you're just stupid. You have no business trying to do this. And I kept thinking, but part of, I think, being an artist and the imagination is that it's okay to fail. It's okay by me to fail. It's okay by me to have a project, to try, to spread my wings, to do it the way I envision, my private vision, even if it fails. But of course, Theaster sits in the seat where a lot of people direct hate towards him because his vision succeeds, because he's capable of realizing the vision.
I mean, I don't. I mean, well, let's just first deal with your papers for a moment.
Oh,
And
I apologize. I have to interrupt you because it's getting towards a time that Laurie has to go to another.
I want to know about your papers. I'm not going
Okay.
without hearing about the papers.
Okay, then.
5 minutes.
Okay.
I mean, for Laurie and I, because I do think that this issue of like artists and the issue of legacy when they're living.
Yes.
Laurie and I met at Captiva because Bob Rauschenberg bought a bunch of land, and to his credit, he would go to the people next to his house and say, "Hey, would you sell me your land and you can stay on it till you die?" And he ended up with about 15 houses, and then next to him is a resort, and ain't nothing else. It's Bob's spot and the resort. And so I think that foresight and the arrogance, what may have looked like who the hell's gonna go to Captiva? And who cares? You know what I mean? But
I
that
don't
he's-
even know where Captiva is.
It's in Florida somewhere. I don't know where. It's in
Okay.
Florida.
It's on the west coast of Florida, and it's
Really beautiful.
It's really beautiful, but it's actually probably not going to be there in 15 years because it's really low. It's right on the Gulf of Mexico. So it's slated to be underwater in about 7 years. And it will be, third floor foundation for a while.
How would you like to see your papers and your legacy? How would you like to see that play out? What would you like people to get from it?
Well, it's the theme that I'm saying, working with the work. My joy is when people are working with my work. It's not in celebrity, it's not in fame, it's not in money. It's when people say, this book changed my life. This book enabled me to stay in graduate school. This book helped me to begin to think about how to love. That's where it is for me. And I think that's where the danger is, too. Like I've been thinking about Cornell a lot, Cornell West, and how attacked he has been in the last couple of years when he says things that people that are not popular. And then he says ridiculously stupid things that we wish he wouldn't say, because a lot of times people latch onto those sound bites, like people did my saying Beyonce was a terrorist, but not really linking that to what I was saying about the traffic in black girls. And I think censorship takes many forms, and one form it can take, it really actually hurts when people are mishearing you or trashing you. I mean, people have called me and say, you need to put a muzzle on your friend Cornell because he's crazy. And I think about that in terms of how work can be discounted, how dissident speech, because I think we have to really establish that there is a difference between being a dissident force in art, in essay writing, and being a force that is speaking in a more neutral or conservative way to the mainstream. And how do you control that when you have so little power? I think of it in terms of feminism. I feel like I'll say people aren't that interested in feminism. I'm not getting all these opportunities to speak because it's like people feel like, well, the time for that is over. And we can see how popular culture has bled into that. I mean, this month's Elle has a whole thing on Shonda Rhimes and feminism, and I'm like, yeah, right. Again, how things are named. But I do want Laurie to say a final, whatever she wants to say. Do you want to, because it is getting late. She has another engagement, and we just really want to thank her for, after her very, very tiring production weeks, that she was willing to come and talk.
Well, I really would love to stay because we haven't actually done a conversation yet, which as you said, that's when you learn stuff, when you talk to other people and, actually stumble along with just kind of like responding to each other instead of like, so, but so that's what I regret about, I do have to go because I promised these people many, many, many months ago before I knew that you were going to do this. So I hope you have a really great conversation. And then you all get involved in it too, because it's like that's the magic of being in groups. You know, they actually can talk to people instead of just listening. So, how long is this going to go on? Maybe I'll come back after this.
No,
thing.
unfortunately,
I'm usually the last one to leave, you know, so it's humiliating
Theaster
to
has
leave
to
early.
teach early in the morning,
you do?
so
Okay.
he will be leaving. I'm afraid I'm the only force that will be here all week, and there'll be plenty of time to talk with me.
Yay!
But, you know. So don't be shy. Go.
No, thanks, Belle. Thanks, Theaster.
Thank
I'm really
you,
sorry I
audience,
missed this.
for, you know. So I want to know how Theaster deals with everybody thinking, and I don't want to hurt your feelings, but people think, oh, well, he's sold out. He's a puppet of the white establishment, all those kinds of things. Do they bother you? Do you even deal with them?
Well, you know, it requires that you have a sense of like what your project is and what your purpose is, and that in the long game of it, it doesn't matter. It's really it's a project that's a project over time, and as a result of that, there's a period where disbelief is part of what you have to go through, and the only thing that can challenge disbelief is time. You know, and so we just have to wait.
But
But
one of the things that sustains both you and I is our spiritual practice and our faith. Because I know that when people are attacking me or I'm getting a lot of hate coming my way, what grounds me, for me, is my faith. My spiritual practices, my belief. There's no sort of body of people that shore me up in those dark nights of the soul or what have you. It's me.
Yeah.
And my belief in a higher power and in a purpose. And I know both you and I feel very driven by a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if we were to really, if
Oh,
we,
God, I just realized I was like Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was gonna try to dig you out of that one, but let's say that there is a need for tactics, maneuvers that are the kind of fallout of our belief mechanisms. That, okay, so for my mom, as a result of a certain kind of internal belief, that meant she cooked extra collard greens. And that, like, however you get from faith to collard greens, which meant that my aunt could have collard greens and the thugs on the block could have collard greens, that there was a way in which there was excess collard greens when some people cooked collard greens for two. But as a result of the extra collard greens, it meant that when I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, there were these thugs around me who ate my mama's collard greens. So in that way, the tactics of belief had to do with generosity and belief in other people and a kind of an openness, like we never locked our door. And it made us susceptible to some things, but it made us far less susceptible because of the generosity. And so I think that in some ways, I'm really actually leery of talking about faith given our current right, the way that politics align sometimes around God.
Whereas I think we have to talk about it because otherwise we give it over.
Yes, but I think that there's a way in which when something seemingly impossible is done, and it kind of defies whatever the varying rubrics are that prevail in the world, then you're kind of just left with a couple things, like either the dude's a magician or she's a witch, or there's something else that's like also governing. And I think that, again, it's long game. Like, I still feel like I'm in the middle of training, that I'm just still figuring out what all these acts mean, and I don't have the burden on myself to. It's like I'm just trying stuff. The bank was a trial. You know, it was a bigger trial than the trial before, but they're trials. They're ways of imagining, like, okay, if there's not a music venue, what does it mean to create a music venue?
In the hood.
In the hood. If I can't go to Newberry Library, or if I feel like that space is a little bit stuffy, which is like kind of an important archive place in Chicago, then what would be an unstuffy archival
Absolutely. I mean,
institution?
one of the things I said to people, I don't want people to come to the Bell Hooks archive and have to show ID and have to give over things that they possess to be examined, because to me that's part of the sort of fascism of prison culture and surveillance that permeates our society more and more as a whole. That I thought what it would mean to be able to walk into a space where you're not under surveillance, where you are not seen as negative, as, oh, you must be here to steal something, or you must be here to wreck something, and to how to change that way of thinking about people, not just black people, but poor people. Because, I live in Appalachia. It's a poor region. In many ways, when it comes to resources, it's a region that is under siege. The wealth of the coal mining, the destruction of our environment, all of those things. What does it mean to envision a way, as I do, that is my private vision, of bringing people together to educate and learn and talk outside of the university setting, outside of something where you've got to identify yourself?
What I've found is I had a party among my Ebony and Jet periodicals, and it was the rich people that stole my shit. The folk that come and use the stuff every day, they were really with a tremendous amount of respect for the things that were around them. But it was actually folk that had a little bit of privilege that thought, well, he has 3 of the November 1961 to October 1962, and he won't miss the one duplicate. They don't know we had already locked it down and had a video. We had a little camera over in the corner. And so it was really interesting to think about, for real, who's willing to gank something from a small cultural institution.
In the hood.
In the hood. I like that you keep saying that, because I do think that we were making these small buildings. If those small buildings were in another part of Chicago, like if they were in Pilsen, or if they were up in the North Shore or something, they would be just normal buildings. But the fact that they were where they were made them very, very special.
But it also makes it that you are at risk.
Yeah.
That Theaster is at risk from the naysayers outside, but also from the people inside who may feel like, what is he doing on our turf?
Yes. I mean, but again, it kind of just depends on your stakes. A welterweight shouldn't enter a heavyweight ring, or I don't want to it's like there's a way in which I could have a different kind of practice that was under the radar, that was kind of just a. And people make decisions all the time to either have voice or not have voice, and have agency or not have agency. And the work that I need to do just requires a certain amount of core strength, because there'll be punches. But that part is actually just kind of an aside to the work, right? So it means like this bank, we had a press conference. So we had a press conference, all these people came, and so they all took pictures of the bank, and then there were all these pictures of the bank, and then some friends of mine were at a dinner, and at the dinner they were having the Theaster conversation. And it was like, well, why is Theaster kind of taking up all of the oxygen? It's like, well, we just had a press conference for a thing that hadn't been done in a black neighborhood in the last 60 years. Maybe it's worth talking about. And you know, it's really you start to see the tension that may exist around the varying kinds of artistic practices and the class issues and the race issues that may ensue, because there is a part of my practice that is comfortable talking about money. But it's like, I was broke all my life. And so I never had the burden of not talking about money because there was never nothing to talk about. But for some of my friends who have a kind of conservative approach to cash, some of them are 5th or 6th generation, or at least 2nd or 3rd generation, where the public conversation about what they had was a kind of faux pas, and it also meant a certain kind of exposure. And so I didn't learn the rules of exposure. It's only now that I'm learning, like, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about how much my shoes cost. You know, I'm really proud of my shoes.
Or where did you get that shirt? That's what I asked him. Well, where did you get that shirt?
I had it made. In Turkey.
So, I hate to say this, but we're going to take a couple of questions. Yes, you can, you know. Because unfortunately, Theaster has to go. He's catching his plane. So a couple of quick questions. Your name, your question, your name.
Hi. Cool. Thank you. My name is Michael, and I just have a quick question for you, Theaster. All right. So, like, sort of like going from your home and transposing onto the world. If you need a camera in your home, what does that say about the world and like the relationship between security and community?
Right on. So the books aren't in my home. Like in a way, if we would imagine the types, the kind of building types that one lives with, there's my home, which is my home. Then there's the building across the street that used to be my home, which is now where we keep the slides and where we keep, you know, these archives. And that building, because it was more public and because of we wanted to be good caretakers of those things, we wanted to like care for them. Part of the security package was there are gonna be times when, in acceptance of this neighborhood, sometimes bad things happen. And
That's the reality.
And so one of the challenges that we also like don't want people to get hurt. But there are these moments where the camera only gets activated when like it's triggered, when there's a trigger, right? And so there are ways in which we can kind of monitor, you know, so like in the same way that if you were to try to touch a Picasso and there's a laser, it goes, and then that is enough at the Louvre to keep you kind of, it's like a kind of social programming. We didn't even want that. We were like, look, y'all, please don't take nothing. We don't want we don't want you to go through a metal detector. You know, we want there to be, but don't take nothing. And, you know, there's a camera, so, like, we gonna get you, but, like, you know. And I think you're right that there's a way in which the surveillance is about a kind of, it's both a care for these things and trying to be a good steward of them, but it's also, like, hopefully either a retardant or my mom used to say, like, don't lead people into temptation. Like, there was one time I left my iPhone on my truck, and I left it on the truck, and I went in the house. And my mom would say, I caused the person to sin. And I'm like, Mama, I didn't cause nobody to sin. I left my iPhone on the truck. I didn't lead nobody into temptation. And like those moments where you just try to reduce the amount of temptation that happens. And so that camera is like the reduction in temptation.
Well, I mean, I wish we had a lot more time to talk about class because, you know, the first thing that happened when the Institute got set up was my institution said, we need security. We need we need an alarm system. And I was like, are you kidding? Inside the Bell Hooks Institute is my collection of contemporary African American art. And they were like, well, Bell, you know, somebody could come in and get this art. And I'm thinking, if the rednecks around me want to come in and get the art, that's something. That's an achievement. I mean, but that was my witty self. And then my other self was saying, you may have to compromise on this. And so I wish and we'll have another conversation to talk about how each step of the way, as you change something, as you move something, and it alters the environment in which you dwell within, how can you decide the impact?
Bill, let me just say one more thing related to that. We applied for a big grant recently and were turned down because we were told that the things that I've collected are collections, they're not archives. And that the money that I was applying for was money for archives. And it was like, well, how do we get money to convert our collections, which are things that are not completely retrievable by some kind of data set, or things that could not immediately get hooked up to another set of professionalized data points in the world? How do we get it from what it is today, a collection, to an archive? And they were like, we don't know how you do that, but you can't have our money until it's this other thing. And so we have the problem of, you got a 1954 first edition ebony jet, and you like, ooh, this is cute. Right? And just like, like, I'm not super precious, but it's like the registrar is like, So I'm like, easy registrar. Like, is there a way then to deal with the fact that we want to preserve this thing so that other people can look at it without too many rips in it, right? We want to make it more accessible than certain other kinds of institutions would ever make their special collections, while at the same time wanting to make it trying to preserve it to the same level that an institution would want to preserve a thing. And that tension is a complicated tension. It means that, like, when you get a library card, we're going to teach you how to use our books. It's just a little bit of acculturation.
One other question, and then Theaster has to go to the airport. Your name?
My name's Leslie.
Hey, Leslie.
And I was here in 1974 when Joseph Beuys was here to lecture. And your work reminds me in some ways of his work, because he would do a social action like taking a broom and sweeping the plaza in Germany as a way to convince people they had, even in a little gesture, that you can be a part of democracy and making the world better. And he made a lot of sculpture out of like garbage and detritus and ugly things people had never used before.
Tar. He uses tar.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were influenced by him and how you came to have this view of it's almost like you are another of the social sculptors.
Right. Oh, man. So, all right, 3 succinct things.
Yes.
When Erykah Badu admitted that she didn't know Ella Fitzgerald, that was an interesting moment. Right? Like there had been this thing before her that she was kind of in the... So let's say that
Yes.
I was doing what I was doing, and then I learned of Joseph Beuys. And one of the, so that's point one. That like, and at the same time, around that time, I learned of when I learned of Joseph Beuys, I learned of Donny Hathaway. I knew that he was the This Christmas, but I didn't know his name. But around the time, I was like 17, Joseph Beuys, Donny Hathaway. Okay. Joseph Beuys had this notion that like anybody could be an artist. But he didn't really mean anybody could be like Laurie Anderson. What I think he meant was, let's say that how many people in here are studying something other than art? Right. So let's say half the room will be postal workers, drivers, doctors, lawyers, biologists, whatever their deal. That there's a way to enter those policymakers, government people, that there's a way to enter those forms with the spirit of an artist, and imagine that you have the capacity to transform within your field. Like, could I freak this postal worker system? Just be like the dancing postal worker. Like, bam. And so I love that.
point.
Third point. Third point is that I think that Joseph Beuys remained in the realm of the symbolic. And I don't think I, or black artists, or people concerned about the world, I don't think that I can keep it in the realm of the symbolic. There are times when the action has to actually deliver something that other sectors of the world should be delivering, and it's fucked up that artists have to do it, but I'm down.
Well, I'm thinking of the 1977 song by Enchantment that's Gloria, which is my given name. I don't want to live another day without your love. And so I want to say that, you know, when Theaster said that he wanted to come to Berea, instead of feeling like it was the most natural thing in the world that this artist should want to be in my presence and talk to me, I thought that I was suspicious. And I think that that's the sad state of where we have been as African American artists, so much looking to the dominant culture for our, you know, Paulo says we cannot enter the struggle as objects in order later to become subjects. So when Theaster honors me, reflecting both my subjectivity and my power and my artistry, that should be simply, I don't want to live another day without your love. It should not be that I have fear. So when fear is in the room, love is absent. And when love is in the room, we don't have to fear. I thank Laurie and Theaster for daring what they dare and for being with all of us. And I want to express my regret that we don't have a longer period of time. In the past, we've had longer periods of time to talk together. So I thank all of you in your beauty and your splendor for coming out to hear us, and hope there are tidbits and big bits that you take with you. And thank you, New School and Stephanie Browner and all of you who helped to make this happen.